What would you say to all the parents out there on a journey like yours?
Trust your gut.
This is the UNspecial podcast. So today we have Krista Bourne. Krista is a powerful mom with a powerful story on a powerful mission. So thank you so much for being here, Krista.
Absolutely my pleasure.
And Krista has an interesting take on everything. She has Joey. Joey is autistic. She is on the board of Autism Health Summit. So, Krista, why don't you just let's start with learning about you a little bit.
Sure. So I have been a speech pathologist since 1993 when I first started in speech pathology. My first couple of kids out of grad school that I had that were on the spectrum, I had no idea what to do with them because we didn't learn about it in grad school because we didn't know any autistic kids. Certainly when I
Right.
think back, I'm going to be 56 next week. And I'm like, I didn't know any kids, adults, anyone with autism when I was growing up. It was unheard of. And
Yeah.
certainly even in 93, it was very, very rare. So I was started in a special ed preschool and we had a few. Each of those families, the parents told me their kid was fine for a certain point, hitting all the developmental milestones and then regressed, and that they truly believed it was from the vaccines. I unfortunately was still brainwashed by the safe and effective. So 6 years later, I saw it happen in front of my own eyes with my son Joey. Hit all of his milestones. In fact, I was working in a special ed preschool at the time, and my lunch hour, I had him there with all kinds of developmental experts from OTs and PTs and speech therapists to special ed teachers, psychologists, they all could attest. He'd be sitting there playing peekaboo, completely related, had some words, it was about 12, 13 months when he regressed, when he received the MMR and his varicella shot the same day, which in the insert it actually says they should never be given together, but completely disregarded. So in addition to his complete developmental regression, where not only he lost his words, but stimming on the ceiling fan, walking in a circle, flapping his hands, not even responding to his name any longer. He also developed an autoimmune disorder. It's called idiopathic thrombocytopenia. Basically, as the hematologist explained it, there was some viral exposure. In fact, she asked me, did he spike a temp? Was he sick around that time? No, his viral exposure was the vaccines, certainly. And a few years later, actually, the mechanism is his body's making antibodies to fight the viral exposure,
Mm-hmm.
and his body actually interprets his own platelets as foreign and attacks them. I have rheumatoid arthritis, and it's the same premise. My body is attacking my cartilage, and hence the 3 joint replacements. But it is an autoimmune disorder, and certainly in his case, I have a very medical family, and they had suspected that maybe he had the ITP from birth, but we didn't know until he started bumping into things as it became more ambulatory. So I called up the pediatrician. I said, do we have a platelet count on him prior to a year? And when they pulled up his files, they also, the same day of that appointment where he got the MMR and the varicella shot, they also check for the lead level. The paints have lead, and so they check the lead level. So they do a CBC for that. And his platelet count was totally in the normal range. It was over 150,000. Now, in the past few years, we've been in and out of the hospital for weeks at a time because his platelets have been so low. And, that's very detrimental. The immediate allopathic way is, okay, he's having an autoimmune flare up. We need to put him on steroids to suppress his immune system. So then you have a 6-foot tall man confined to a hospital bed who's nonverbal, who can't speak, for what he needs. Now raging on steroids, adrenaline dump, a security guard at each limb holding him down while
Oh
they're
my
pounding him with
gosh.
Tylenol. Yeah, it's been quite the journey. Actually, we were in remission for many years, for probably a little over a decade, with the ITP. And in 2021, January of 21, he got COVID. He didn't even have symptoms of COVID, but it reactivated that thrombocytopenia. That's another problem with COVID among the many. So we were literally in the hospital for 8 weeks trying to, treatments that had worked when he was younger no longer worked. And then certainly at one point when he was younger, I used to take my autistic son to the pediatric hematology oncology unit. I live on Long Island, with, literally like the kids getting chemo treatments or whatever. I'd be there for 5-hour IVIG treatments for him to try to get his platelets boosted back up. I did mean to say before, a few years later, when I was working with the besides just his numbers being okay prior to those shots, when I spoke with an immunologist I was working with a few years later, and I was saying, I'm telling you, this is what triggered it. I thought I was going to have to really put up a whole show for him. And he's like, of course it does. It did, Krista. He's like, the MMR, the insert itself literally lists the thrombocytopenia right within it. It is one of the side effects of the MMR. And like I said, his platelets were normal the day of. So anyway, we used to do IVIG treatments, and it was a very transient response, but it would bounce his platelets at least into a safe range for a few weeks at a time. More recently, when it happened again, once the vaccine rollouts took place, IVIG is pulled from like over 1,000 donors, especially his dose because he's so large. So I have just refused giving him IVIG treatments any longer because I don't want him to be exposed to the spike proteins and all from the vaccinated donors. So it's limited how we could treat it. More importantly, I still feel that a big part of his vaccine injury was to his gut, and your immune response is totally dictated by the gut-brain connection. So his autism symptoms are happening as a result of neural inflammation, and that's what we need to get down. So I'm doing a lot of biomedical to help to detox the metals. Again, things are complicated in his situation. A lot of the things that many autism families are doing biomedically, because he has this other complication with the platelets, a lot of people will chelate the metals out. And because his platelets are so low, nobody wants to touch that with him. So I use some, milder, the zeolite sprays and that sort of thing to try to get the mercury and the aluminum, which were off the charts. Out of his system.
Man, my mind is swirling.
I didn't even come up for air on that one. I'm sorry. I'm like, and another thing.
I have so many questions, but I want to go back to, where do I start? Let's go back to the early days.
Yes.
So you said around 2 years old?
He was probably about 14 months when he regressed.
14 months.
Yeah.
And what were you starting to see?
Joey was a very happy, affectionate baby, breastfed for a full year, hit all his developmental milestones, very, very connected, very happy, slept well, just a perfect little baby boy, right? Mm-hmm. And he literally, on a dime. In fact, it was interesting. He was in daycare in my building, and right around the time he regressed, he was moved to the older class. And that class, they happened to have their nap time during my lunch hour, so I wasn't able to take him during my lunch. So some of my friends that had seen him, completely engaged and connected for the first 12 months, no longer saw him at that time. But I, of course, would, as soon as I would get him home, was like, guys, something's not right. And I think because I'm a speech pathologist, my friends just thought maybe there's some delays there and she just wants him to talk more. And I'm like, no, he lost his words. And not only that, it's that disconnect. He wasn't even aware, I literally had his hearing checked, but I knew it wasn't his hearing. When he was little, you would call him, he'd look right at you, just very engaged and smiling and just so interactive, so connected. Mm-hmm. And then I'm sitting there going, Joey, following him around the room, and he's flapping his hands, walking in a circle, unaware that I was even there, just no connection at all. The thing that here's a really silly thing, but it was a moment in time for me that I was like, there's no turning back here. Joey absolutely loves Sesame Street and Elmo and whatnot. So I took my husband at the time, and I took him to Sesame Place, and they literally had this parade with similar to Disney World, a 6-foot tall Elmo, they were all, and I'm sitting there on the line, waiting for and the parade's coming by. And this kid, every kid around me, of course, was like, woo, they were so calling for Elmo, whatever. And Joey just sat there and I'm like, the way this kid was would jump through the screen to get to Elmo, Mm-hmm. And then he's sitting there with a parade of these characters going by and just do in his own world.
Wow.
He was gone. He was, I hate to say it, but a shell of who he was, know. He just lost that connection.
How did you navigate obviously I have no idea, but you're not alone. I've heard this from multiple parents. What would you speak to the emotional journey of that process?
I think I numbed myself. That was my response. You know, it's like you get up in the morning and you got to get through the day. You got to do everything you can do for them. I think it was just so overwhelming that and now I'm going to get really upset. If I didn't, those first few months were very rough.
Mm-hmm.
And then my personal story is about 2 or 3 months after he regressed, my mom suffered at 59 years old, suffered a brainstem bleed, was in a coma for 6 weeks, and then basically woke up for 18 months. But those 18 months, basically, she was completely paralyzed, wheelchair bound, blank stare, trach, G tube, J tube, everything you could think of. And by the way, my mom, when people tell me that I remind them of her,
Mm-hmm.
it is by far the best compliment I could ever get. My mother was my everything. Raised 6 kids, just phenomenal, living, amazing person. For 18 months, she had, while I'm pushing my 15, 16, 17-month olds up through 3 years, 2 years, I'm sorry, in a stroller to the best hospitals in Manhattan. And basically 18 months of one medical complication after the other. She passed after 18 months. So I guess to answer your question, you were like, what was that like navigating that? Like having that happen at the same time. I literally had to just go numb and like wake up every day and show up for this kid.
Yeah.
But I look back on like that period and I'm like, how did I? And then, if one more person tells me, how God only gives you what you can handle. Unfortunately, I really turned away from my faith because I was like, and my husband at the time was going through a serious depression as well. So I was like, my husband, my mother, and my son, really, God?
Yeah.
And so I turned away from my faith at that point and just went numb and just made myself wake up every day and somehow get through it.
Mm-hmm.
But once, here we are years later, right? And I'm still fighting the fight for him. I think because of what I do as a career, I've dealt with so many of these families that like have such similar stories that I'm like, I can't sit here and watch another generation of children be poisoned. And I truly believe like everything we've been through, has been to get me here so that I can help those families, so that I could be a voice for those families. I actually went on a retreat a few years ago, and I remember sitting there sharing how, I have to basically like heal the ones that have already been injured. And then I have to educate the new young parents who are starting a family so that this doesn't happen to them. And then I have to like single-handedly take down pharma. And I remember sitting in this room full of women. I'm like, wait, this is what I'm supposed to do. And I'm like, here I am. And a little over a year ago, I went to the CHD conference and I met Tracy.
Uh-huh.
Bought her book instantly, went home, found out she was having the first Autism Health Summit a month later.
Tracy Slepcevich?
Tracy Slepcevic, yes.
She's
And
the
her husband,
author
Steve.
of Warrior Mom.
Correct.
And her and her husband founder of the Autism Health Summit.
Correct. So I had found out that she was hosting the conference in San Antonio I believe it was last February, a little over a year ago.
Was that the first one?
That was the first one.
Okay.
And I literally, I borrowed from my retirement. Like, I'm getting there. I'm getting access to, I was really, for many years, the kids that I had on my caseload, a lot of the kids that are vaccine injured have very blatant gut issues. You talk to the parents and there's diarrhea and constipation and all these, the gray bags under their eyes. Joey never had that, but so I presumed he didn't really have the gut issues because he had the platelet problem, right? I thought that was his autoimmune problem. But in the years since, he absolutely does have the gut problems as well. And I did forget to tell you, besides the MMR and the varicella doing him in, when he was 2, 3, and supposed to be at 4 months old, they had a rotavirus shot that was a series of 3 shots once a month for 3 months. I took Joey to those first 2 appointments. He got those. And when we came back for the third one, I was told that it's been recalled because it was causing gut dysbiosis. So I think that started the gut stuff. But again, because he didn't have those typical symptoms of leaky gut, just presumed that he didn't have the gut issues, but since then we've done a whole bunch of workups and stuff, and he does. Unfortunately, because of the low platelets, nobody will scope him because he's at risk of bleeding. But we've done very thorough testing, and there are a lot of gut things. So I have him on the gluten-free diet now and those sort of things. But I'm sorry, I got off on a tangent again.
No, that's good.
So yeah.
But I mean, there's so much power in your mission and what you're doing, because like we talked about at the conference, you're answering the call that God has put on your life.
I absolutely feel that.
There was an overwhelming presence of that at the conference, even in all the scientists and all the speakers, and just the messaging with Tracy and her husband of stepping in and leaning into that call, whatever it may be for whoever.
Yes.
And recently we've had a couple guests on the show with adoption stories, powerful adoption stories of, when they get the paper that says they want to adopt, and then on the paper it has, who are you willing to adopt? Are you willing to adopt somebody on a feeding tube who's hard of hearing, who's blind? And a few guests ago, they signed up to adopt a visually impaired child. And it's like, they answered that call. The last episode that just dropped Monday, a family has adopted 6 children and 2 of them on the autism spectrum. So it's crazy how all these events and the timing of the podcast and everything of just stepping in and leaning into that call that God's put on your life. We'll get into your mission in a little bit, but
sure.
How has Joey changed your perspective on life?
Wow. He's my hero.
Yeah.
He's the light of my life. He really is. I have, and as soon as I say this, people are like, you can't feel that way, but I do. I know certainly I did not do anything intentionally to harm him, but I do live with this guilt that, I carried this beautiful baby boy for 9 months and, certainly wanted nothing but the best for him. Yeah. And even though I didn't knowingly do that, I did promise to keep him safe and protect him. And something I did, a decision I made because maybe I didn't do my research or because I just fell prey to, like I said, I literally had parents telling me for 6 years, that's what happened to their kid. And I brought him to the pediatrician and I did what ultimately caused him both his autism and his platelet disorder. So that's something that is really hard for me and probably a big part of why I feel compelled to get word out there to families, because I don't ever want anyone to have that. I mean, when I think about, everyone, when you're about to have a child, all the hopes and dreams, and because of, listen, and I said this to you when we spoke, if God had given me Joey exactly the way he was at birth, every disability, everything that he has going on, the autoimmune thing, I would truly believe that that's what God wanted for me. And listen, I went into speech pathology because I love working with special needs populations, right? That's what I wanted to do my whole life. It's the needlessness of this. And even if it first happened to Joey and pharma didn't know, or it really, the connection wasn't there, that would be one thing. But I know for a fact they've been throwing money at it in court and hiding this for 25, 30 years now. They're aware. For this to have happened to my son, the wedding I'll never dance at, the grandchildren I'll never have, the college graduation I'll never go to, because pharma wanted to knowingly line their pockets. That I can't, this is a whole new level for me, right? This is like, there was a time when I naively thought this is a, political left versus right. No, this is 100% dark and evil and completely spiritual in nature, where you're literally, they've taken out a generation of children, and the ripple effect that it's had on the families, right? My son is my world, and seeing him suffer all the things that he's been denied so that pharmaceutical companies could profit. I can't sit here silent anymore. He's an incredible man. And, thankfully, one of the other things I found, through attending the conference last year was the spellers community and spelling to communicate. Joey is currently learning how I went for the CRP training, the communication regulation partner. And so he's learning it. But just like I learned in grad school with the adults I had that had strokes and whatnot, it's motor. It's really teaching them to get around the apraxia. And he's learning that, but that's a slow journey. And I'm now currently enrolled in the practitioner course because I said I'm opening a clinic in New York, and
Amazing.
I'm getting these kids going. He needs to progress more to where he can be what's called an open communicator. Like, I can't wait till the day I could really get to know my son and know what's
Yeah.
inside him, and that day is coming soon. So that's, amazing.
Yeah. How you have an interesting take because I know there's a lot of controversy around spellers.
Yes.
And you being a speech and language pathologist makes it even more
Yeah.
interesting because a
Correct.
lot of the criticism comes from
From Asha.
SLPs
Yeah.
and ASHA, the Academy of Speech and Hearing
Hearing Association. Yep.
Association. What would you say to that? Because on my side of it, so I taught special ed for 7 years in a mod
Right.
severe.
Right.
All of my students pretty much were non-speakers and very violent. It was my jam. I loved it.
I'm the same way.
I
I
just, I
wrestle with them.
just,
I love
I
it.
enjoyed the unpredictability and my OCD, ADD, like the never ending puzzle of not being able to figure out just drove me and I loved it.
Yeah.
But with the doubters out there, my question to them is what benefit is it to doubt the ability of the student to actually spell and speak their thoughts? Because like
I think the
why not
skepticism.
presume competence?
Yeah, and that's a great question, but I don't think the question is really like, why doubt it? The skepticism, I don't think, comes from like, why not encourage them trying to spell? I think the skepticism comes from the belief that these individuals are cognitively impaired or they don't have, so that they're, the way it started off, even when I first got out of grad school, my first supervisor told me about facilitated communication years
Right.
ago. And it was literally taught to me as how that was debunked, that the person prompting was actually moving the board like some kind of Ouija board or something, and it was really the prompter's words and thoughts and not the
Right.
individual who was doing the spelling. And I, again, foolishly, the same way I foolishly believed the vaccines were safe, I foolishly believe that these people that were doing the facilitated communication, it really was the prompter and not the individual. Again, in grad school, I learned, about the kids who are low functioning and how they have all these auditory processing deficits. So I have never, let me just make a blanket statement. I have never been so happy to be so just acknowledge the fact that the thing I thought I was an expert in, I couldn't have been more off the mark. Like, I am 100%. I've never been so happy to be so wrong in my life, because everything I was taught in grad school was how, they're low functioning, and how, I mean, even this is only the last 18 months that I've been doing this with Joey. And I still was talking to a 25-year-old man, asking him if he needed to go to the potty, because I'm thinking I need to simplify things because he doesn't always understand what I'm saying, and like, besides the wonderful things that are to come as he becomes an open communicator, just in the past year and a half that I have done, the main thing that needs to be done with the spelling community is presuming competency. Okay. So I was, and as a speech pathologist, I was telling my parents, if you give them too much information at once, you have to simplify, you have to give them visual cues, you have to do all these things, because these kids on the spectrum have all these comprehension issues and they have all these cognitive deficits. And so, for lack of a better term, we do tend to like dumb down to help them to understand. And let me tell you, when at Tracy's conference, she actually had, I want to say, 5 or 6 individuals there on a panel typing away on a keyboard with a voice output. And then, of course, there were still the skeptics who were saying, oh, well, anyone could have typed that and then the computer just does the voice output. How do we know it's that there? So it was wonderful because they then did like an open panel, and the audience was just asking them questions, and, they're telling them about their favorite hobbies. And I was like, oh my God. And then at one point, the most unbelievable thing I said, even as skeptical as I was because of the history. In fact, when I first found out about spelling to communicate, I found out about it at the CHD conference. Actually, Maya Han, who was also one of the volunteers that helped a lot with the summit this time around, is also an SLP. Her son is a speller. She had given me like a QR code for the Spellers documentary, which if you haven't seen it, everyone has to see it. She gave me it and I ended up watching it on the plane on the way home. She literally, she was like, watch this movie. I'm telling you, Krista, it's going to be life-changing for you. And I'm like, okay. But in my head, I had the history with facilitated communication and then even RPM. RPM, were it not for Soma and RPM, we never would have progressed to where we're at. And there are many people that are doing RPM these days that are doing great with it, that are openly communicating.
And RPM's rapid prompting method.
Rapid prompt method. And, when Joey was younger, I had heard that. And again, it's the way things are presented. It's like, this is the flavor of the month. We're trying that, but it's been disproved. Either way, I tried it with Joey at the time when he was young, and Joey was very, very, very aggressive and self-injurious. And so we did a few sessions and it just didn't seem to take. So I was like, okay, it's kind of like facilitated communication. And I absolutely saw, like, Soma actually came to Long Island and I saw her working in the clinic with a number of individuals that did great with it. So I just felt I didn't delegitimize it in any way. Like, it certainly was working for these individuals, but I tried it with Joey and it just seemed like he wasn't that kid, right? So I'm like, well, Joey just must be lower functioning than these ones that were able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I had that history of facilitated communication, then RPM, and now I show up and they're telling me about spelling to communicate or spellers. There's actually several methods of spelling that's going on now. But I once again was like, okay, like I've already been there, done that.
Yeah.
And here I am, the speech pathologist, I'm the expert, right? And then I hear Astra doesn't back it, so I'm like,
That's how
all
you
right.
know it's good.
I'm like, right. Now in hindsight, and I said, I'm going to be the first one to knock down Asher's door to let them know, oh, this is legit. So that's why I'm going for the practitioner now, so that I could, and as part of my training, I've been working with 3 individuals for the spelling, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
But so I started to say before, when I was at one of the conferences, I down in San Antonio, I don't know anybody. I'm there by myself, just trying to get information for Joey. So I make my plate while their speeches are still going on. I go and I sit down at the table, and all of a sudden I look up and I see Cade from the movie and his mom walking towards us, and they're like, "Oh, can we sit with you?" I'm like, "Yeah." Literally bawling, thanking them for this life-changing, letting us know, and he opens up his little Bluetooth keyboard and he's like, "Hey, nice to meet you." And I'm like, blown away, completely blown away. I'm like, no matter how skeptical I was, no matter what Asher was saying about it, like, this young man sat down next to me and started typing away. I'm like, yeah, that's his thoughts,
Yeah.
like, there's no denying it. Yeah,
I mean, you've seen it firsthand, and there's so many testimonials.
Yes.
I remember when I came across RPM, I think it was like my second year teaching, and I was blown away. I'm like, are you kidding me? You're telling me I can actually get into their head? Because that was always the most interesting thing for me, and to hear their thoughts. And then I remember I read Ito and Autism Land.
Yes.
And I forget the other names of the books, but I'm reading stories about kids when they finally get unlocked. The first thing one said was, "Stop talking to me like a baby." Another one said is, "I'm finally freed from the silent prison." And then we had a mom on a ways back who gave her son stem cell treatment. And the first words he said were, "I love you, Mom." And I'm just like, this is wild.
No, it's 100% legit. In fact, when I first found out and I started the CRP training and everything, Joey was in preschool with this boy, Christopher, and he and there was a number of moms that, like, the kids go to school together and then we all become friends, and we'd, whenever we had a minute, which was not all that often, we would all get together or whatever. But, as the kids got older and older, Joey's 26 now, we kind of lost touch, but we're still like friends on Facebook or whatever. So as I'm learning about spellers, I see my friend Liz's Facebook post about Christopher's blog page. And I'm like, wait, Christopher was nonverbal also. Like, he was, I kind of considered him around the same level as Joey. They were both low functioning.
Mm-hmm.
And his blog post was, how he is, beyond grateful that his family, he's actually one of a triplet. His 2 sisters are neurotypical and he happened to be severely autistic, but how his family never gave up on him, and how now they know how smart and funny he is and all that. And it just is amazing. So as soon as I started doing the practitioner course, I'm like, okay, I'm going to work with him. Like, I want his, like, he blows me away, the things he comes up with. These individuals are all in there, and we're giving them a voice now, through this modality. It's unbelievable.
What will it mean to you? And I say will because it will happen.
Yes.
What will it mean to you when you unlock Joey?
I can't even begin to say, like, it's so interesting because now, in fact, and this is how I know his comprehension is there. Joey's in a group home a little over an hour away from me. So unfortunately, I'm only, able to see him the once or twice a week when I see him to work on it. And the practice is so important to get. I have to say, he progressed really quickly from the 3 boards to the 1 board.
Mm-hmm.
And he is starting to answer some open questions. He's not at the point where he's like openly communicating his own thoughts and needs, because I have to kind of know what letters he's going for to help prompt him, so if he's just thinking whatever he's thinking, there's no way of me to guide him. But so it was interesting because a lot of times when I was working with him initially, he was getting very dysregulated, and it was only until the last, I want to say, about 2 or 3 months where I realized, like, that's one of the reasons why I wanted him to work with the practitioner, because it was almost like we were too close, and I, without meaning to, apparently, am so excited for him to get to where he's open that I think I was kind of like giving off this, like, like almost like pressuring him, like to try to want him to do it sooner.
Mm-hmm.
And, as it dawned on me, and part of that was as I was doing my practitioner training, a lot of this, our webinars and stuff is really, about, what a lot of the spellers later say once they are open and communicate to like help us through it. So I remember like literally just sitting down with Joey, and I'm like, I literally apologizing to him. I'm so sorry. I'm like, I think that like my excitement to get you to that point has that was making you all anxious, that's why you were becoming less accurate and whatever. And so it actually helped a lot to have but I'm like, it's so amazing. You asked me before, like, what do I, tell you about him? It is unbelievable how a person who has never said a word to me, like, has taught me so much.
Wow.
By far, my son has taught me more than anybody about love, about life, about light, about everything. I know he has so much in there. And the silly thing is, like, I want to know stupid things like his favorite color, like I want to know him.
Right.
But there's a connection there. And the way he looks at me, like, I literally have about 10 shirts that say, I am his voice, he is my heart. And like, that's the summation of it. For all these years, that's been my role, right? Try to figure out what he wants and be his voice. And I truly believe, like, in the very near future, I don't have to be his voice anymore. He's going to be able to be his voice.
Yeah.
I just want to know everything about him. And I have no doubt that day is coming real soon.
Yeah, wow, it's powerful. That's one of our main missions here at UNspecial, is to get the message out that every child was born with a purpose, for a purpose, and has a purpose. Because, society and community, they're just, I don't know, they're just not educated, or they don't
Right.
take the time to really get to know the community. And
I
so,
think so much of it is like they're blocked from the truth. Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, I know I've put up posts, the Protocol 7 movie had come out last year, which was all about, the Merck Merck whistleblower came forward. Actually, he was at our conference.
that was a
Um,
very
yeah,
fascinating talk.
and we couldn't get the movie out there. Not unlike when Vax first was released, Robert De Niro initially backed it to
Right.
go to Tribeca, and then he recanted it. Which again, that negative publicity sometimes is just as good, right? But I went to the New York and LA premieres and was there for the Q&A to hear what Dr. Wakefield had to say. Which, by the way, Dr. Wakefield, I cannot tell you how all of our families, this man has sacrificed beyond so much, his livelihood, to say the least, um, you know in pursuit of really making sure these families be heard. When he put out the movie, and I literally was like, I posting pictures on social media of the premiere, saying, and I said something along the lines of, and this is going back, it was last summer, not this past summer, the one before that. I posted that, like, how happy I was that, like, Joey's story is finally gonna be heard. Like, all these families that have been through this
Yeah.
are finally gonna be, and like literally as I'm finishing typing, I get this thing from Facebook, misinformation, and it's pulled down. And they give me some story about how I was trying to obtain people's data. I'm like, I posted pictures of myself with Rachel Whittle and Matthew Marsden and like, the cast and whatnot. But it was so funny because up until that point, whenever I posted anything about vaccines, I knew to like put an exclamation point instead of the I, because everything's AI, right? And they just will pull it down immediately. So this particular time I was like, I'm so excited that this movie's getting out there. I actually hosted an event to get it out there because the theaters wouldn't hold it. I'm like, this message is going to get out there come hell or high water. And, as soon as I posted that, they like pulled it down. I was like, seriously? Like it's so like in people's defense, when you do Google searches for the real information, it's all being blocked, So it's like, but a lot of that started to change even when Elon Musk bought out Twitter and like finally things were starting to get on social media. But now with RFK and HSS, I'm like, okay, these studies are finally gonna get out there.
Coming to the forefront. You mentioned some of the guilt that you've had to battle through and also how your faith was impacted.
Yes.
Now where you are today, how have you worked through some of that guilt and how has it what has it done to your faith?
So I find a few years ago when I was not following my faith at all, Jeremiah 29:11 just kept showing up. It's so funny how it keeps popping up. And I'm like, okay, yeah, God's got a future with hope and yada, yada, yada. Okay, I got plans for you. Okay, yeah, whatever. Let me just get through the day. And then by the way, it was my job to tell God in my prayers what he needed to do for me and Joey. You know what I mean? That was, so have a little bit, after what I had been through, trusting God's plan was kind of like, really?
What plan?
I don't know about that. How about I tell you what I want you to do for me? How about that?
Yeah.
So that's what I did for a couple of years. And then, like I said, that was about the time that I was on the retreat. And so as I'm sitting there saying all these things that I need to do, that in hindsight, I was already then being called to do. I was like, so let me get this straight. I'm supposed to expose farm moms. Okay, God. Yeah. How about you just fix what's now my ex-husband?
Yeah.
So anyway, I was still like, with what I was dealt, to me, I had to control everything and make it be the way I wanted it to be. I clearly saw what needed to change, and I kept praying for those changes to happen. But and I would say in the last year or two, that's when it really happened. I was like, so I'm supposed to surrender all this to you,
Mm-hmm.
And like even being able to go to the conferences and stuff, the fear and I can't afford that. What am I going to do? And then when I changed my mindset to surrender it all and God will provide, next thing I know, I'm in San Antonio, right?
Yeah.
And I really get to know Tracy. And she's like, listen, and again, like I borrowed from my retirement to get there. Like where there's a will, there's a way, right? And
totally.
When you surrender it and you let God do the work, all these people like Tracy just show up, right?
Uh-huh.
And I truly believe, like angel, like sent to me, I'm literally sitting in her house right now. Like I'm like how I'm on the board. Like I know God was calling me to get this out to the parents that are already, the individuals that need to be healed. I know that God is calling me to be the voice to educate people starting a family now that they don't have to go through this. And I actually remember when I first started to see things when Jeremiah was popping up in my head, and I was going through some real serious financial concerns. My priestess looked at me and said, Krista, God doesn't care about your credit score. Like you need to do what you need to do for you and Joey. And I realized that it's not a coincidence that I was a speech pathologist working with these families for 30 plus years. I really am supposed to like get this to them. So my eternal gratitude to Tracy for, what I learned in San Antonio as we chatted, after that, she's like, I want to do another summit next year. And I want to be able to like I did what I could to get there and to be able to get the information. But there's a lot of families, that really can't. She's like, so she started up this nonprofit, this autism health nonprofit, was so that we can raise money so we can give scholarships. Like a lot of the parents that attended were there, they got free tickets to the conference so they could attend.
Wow.
And that became our mission, right? Like this past year,
Yeah.
we're trying to do fundraisings. We have a 5K walk coming up soon.
When's
We're
that?
just we're probably going to do it virtual, like at multiple sites. We literally were all like, okay, let's get through the conference, and now like literally this week, I'm here all week, and we're already starting like, okay, let's start picking dates and
I'll
what
be
we're gonna do.
there.
Awesome. So, in February, she had a fundraiser at her event at her house. And actually Dr. Hassan and Dr. Hooker were both here as guest speakers. It was phenomenal. So we're doing what we can, certainly the AHS conference, .com, I think it is. I'll give you the website. We can put it in the chat, but you can, donate. You could do recurring donations, whatever. We're just trying to, for the price of a cup of coffee, if you could do a $5-10 a month recurring, that will be extremely helpful. The whole premise of starting the nonprofit was so that the money can go right to these families to get them the resources they need. It's, through attending conferences like the summit. It's also through training, encouraging like the spelling to communicate, and helping families, to access resources so that we can get word out and get them the help they need.
Mm-hmm.
It was a no-brainer for me when she was like, I'm thinking of starting up a board. Would you like? I'm like, yeah, I'd like to be. Yeah, I'd like to be. That I truly feel that is my calling, is to help get to these families.
Yeah. So how did it go about getting on the board? You just asked?
Well, she actually, a number of us that are on the board are autism parents ourselves.
Right.
She put together an incredible group of people. She kind of hand selected who she thought would be there supporting the mission, and every one of us would give anything to make this, reach these families. And unfortunately, there's a lot of single autism moms, because a lot of times, unfortunately, dads hit the road.
Yeah. How about the denial piece? What would you say to parents out there that they go through that? It's a period, but the importance of those early interventions, especially with
early
speech.
years, I actually did early intervention. I was working in a preschool as it was, especially preschool. And then when Joey regressed, I actually did early intervention. I mean, not that preschool is late by any means. It's a good time, to start if that's the case. But those early years, certainly the earlier you get them, the better. It's interesting that you should say that about the denial, though, because what ended up happening with me was when Joey regressed, and I would start to tell people, listen, there is no easy way to handle that and process that. I don't care who the parent is. But for lack of a better explanation, most parents have, again, lack of a better term, the luxury of being able to take it in bits and pieces, because you can be in denial a little more and take it as you can process it. Mm-hmm. The moment Joey regressed, I thought of the previous kids on my caseload. I'm like, Danny used to do that. Tyler used to do that. Jenny used to do that. Krista used to do that. I was like, and when my friends would say to me, oh, what are you talking about? I saw him a month ago and he was doing the tequila dance on the table. Like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, yeah, no, it's not like he's delayed or he's not talking as fast as I would like, has as many words as I would like him to. It's completely disordered. Like he's stimming, he's toe walking, flopping his hands. He's lining up his toys, like the classic textbook things. So it was like, you asked before, like, when did you notice and how did there was no phasing in a little bit of denial here, or like me excusing, well, that he's probably just tired, or, I couldn't, it hit me like a Mack truck. I was like, Joey's autistic. Like, what? It just, so there was no, and I think that's why, to answer what I was saying before, my response was numb. I just was like, wow. I didn't have a chance to be like, why is he doing that? That's odd. It's probably, you saw on TV or something, whatever, make up some excuse for it or whatever. I'm sure it's nothing. It was and again, because of the fact that the people were the shot, it was the people prior were the shot's the shot. I literally was like, Joey's vaccine injured and he's autistic. I'm like, I knew the ramifications of that. Like, this is not reversible. He's not going to get, can he make progress? Of course,
Right.
but like, I'm like, like I said, he reminded me of, the dozen kids I saw prior to that I was like, oh my God, Joey too? There was no, and like I said, my friends who happened to have not been seeing him around that time because he was, he was napping, they were like, Krista, what are you talking about? You just wanted to, I'm like, nope, no.
Yeah. Well, I
And they're
see.
like, oh, well, check his hearing. I'm like, it's not his hearing. Like I'm looking at him and
Well,
he is looking away. He can't look at me.
and it just goes to say, like, the parent knows best. The parent is the
Yeah.
expert in their child.
Yes.
And, in IEP meetings, you have all the experts on one side of the table, and then you get the parent that
Mhm.
comes in. And that's kind of what inspired this podcast, is going through so many IEP meetings and listening to all the experts, but then not a lot of the meetings didn't give the parent the voice or the space to talk. And I'm like, we're missing the biggest piece of this team, the
Yep.
parent. And I think just that advocacy on parents is huge,
Yes.
which you're doing, and which is incredible. What are your thoughts on some of the, which we kind of talked about it at the beginning of the show, the current events going on with RFK saying they're going to find the cause for autism in September? There's a lot of posts swirling around. I saw one this morning that said, we need to think of these 1 in 31 and the rise of autism as a good thing because it's bringing awareness to the community.
Right.
What would you say to that?
Well, you know what? A couple of years ago, when it was 1 in 40, it still, I feel like it was falling on deaf ears because we were just being gaslit and said that, we're crazy conspiracy theorists. I think more importantly, now that RFK is in there and has a platform, the true studies that, Dr. Hooker and many others have done will show, that as the schedule goes up, literally the graph goes like this, with the incidence of autism. It's, people turn around and say, oh, it's just better diagnosis. Like I look back in hindsight when I was a kid, there was 1 or 2 quirky kids in elementary school that probably were Asperger's and slipped through the cracks,
Mm-hmm.
But the Joeys of the world that need group home care because they can't shower themselves,
Mm-hmm.
as RFK said, if the numbers were flat all these years, then there should be a whole bunch of group homes with 60-year-olds in it, right?
Yeah.
Where are those people? If it was 1 in 31 30 years ago, where are the 50-year-old group homes with the same people that are getting care like my son requires the care and supervision that he needs? It didn't exist back then. And the numbers have progressively. 1986, when the PrEP Act was passed, it absolved the pharmaceutical companies. And the reason why that act was passed, by the way, is because the pharmaceutical companies were getting sued so badly from the injuries that were occurring even back then that they were going to go bankrupt. So basically, they gave them this, blank check immunity that, like, literally to this day,
Mm-hmm.
your kid could drop dead in the pediatrician's office and the parents have no recourse.
Mm.
That's it. You can't sue the vaccine company.
Yeah.
It's not like that with any other medication, by the way. I mean, for years, the pharmaceutical companies were giving Vioxx. They were giving Vioxx to cardiac patients and basically putting them in cardiac arrest and killing them. And those, horrific and tragic, but those families at least had recourse and can sue them. But vaccines, you can't. But even that was a knowing thing. Like, they knew about it. Their profit margin was better than their payout, so they continued to kill cardiac patients with their products. But once that legislation was passed, there were, and by the way, the pharmaceutical companies do their own studies. Like, there's no other industry where they allow that, right? So they do their own study. They say safe and effective. I mean, I could get, if you have a little time, I could get into the studies themselves. There's no other way to say this other than when they say it doesn't cause autism. I mean, literally 6th grade scientific method teaches you. The only way you could say that is if you study a vaccinated versus an unvaccinated population and you carry it out for 3 years when they would potentially get the diagnosis and say how many vaccinated kids are on the spectrum, how many unvaccinated. Their studies that they cite, first flaw, is they do it for a very short, and when I say very short, 5 days, 7 days, maybe some even as long as 10 days. They're looking for seizures. They're looking for spikes in temperature. They're looking for rashes or anaphylactic reactions of some kind, death, which does happen in those first 10 days.
Yeah.
After that, they gather their data, and they now, besides it not being a longitudinal study, which you would have to do to say whether a diagnosis was achieved or not, they don't use, there's not a single placebo controlled study. That they always talk about this vast amount of studies. And when in court, when Fauci was called out on it, he said, oh, they're back in Bethesda. So RFK ended up suing him with the FOIA Act and said, you need to present these documents that you're referring to. You're right. We don't have any placebo-controlled trials that show this. Then, if you want to completely just disregard everything I just said and say, okay, show us the study you do have. They have a MMR study. So with a medication trial, you would use, a pill that doesn't really have anything in it as your placebo, right? So with that said, in a vaccine trial, your placebo should be a saline solution, something that's not going to have any impact on your bloodstream or your chemical makeup or anything. Their placebo for many of these trials, like Gardasil, which is, if I can say the worst shot, it's probably Gardasil. Gardasil used a previous form of the Gardasil shot as their placebo. But some of the others that just used their regular old placebo, they didn't use a saline injection for the unvaccinated placebo group. They still include the adjuvants. So if there's aluminum, formaldehyde, mercury, or whatever in there. So then at the end of the study, when you compare your vaccinated to your unvaccinated, you're right, there is no increased incidence of autism spectrum or cancer or anything else, because the very ingredients that are causing these disabilities and diseases is in your placebo group. Oh. And then with the COVID vaccine, they actually initially had a placebo group, and then they, down the line, because these vaccines were so life-saving, they offered the placebo group the vaccine. So now you don't have a control group to compare it to. So that really helps you hide all of your deaths and injuries, because you don't have a control group to compare it to. It was all very calculated and done. And then they tried to hide the information for 75 years. Yeah, when I said to you at the start of this that this was completely spiritual warfare, I mean, and the thing is, RFK having a platform now is going to expose all of this. There have been tons of Aaron Series court testimonies. It's completely indisputable. It's indisputable. I mean,
and he's the lawyer for
the attorney,
Children's Health Defense.
Yes, and the stuff, I've had the opportunity to speak with Dr. Hooker on a couple of occasions. It's just unbelievable, the studies and the things, the information that he has that, gets blocked and put up as misinformation and whatnot. So when I say the feeling at the summit the other day was just so positive, because we've turned the corner now, right? Like, it's a matter of time. This stuff is all finally coming out. All the years of the cortisol dump. I mean, literally, I lived 20 years in fight or flight, like I'll be honest, from like Joey literally getting very physical with me and whatever, in that respect, being traumatic, to being equally as hard to try to convince people to spare them of their own detriment, by the way, to be gaslit and talk to, I've literally had people to say to me, to my face, I understand why you feel, after everything you've been through with Joey, it's understandable that you feel that way. Almost like in a patronizing, it's no wonder you fall for this, anti-vax conspiracy theories, because you've been through so much. So of course, as though I'm only accusing pharma because I'm looking for someone to blame for my kid's injury. You know what I mean? And it's just like that, literally the visceral reaction that, by the way, knocks years off my life. My own autoimmune stuff, so much of it is the years of having to try to convince people, improve people, to try to help them save their own loved one's life, essentially. And it's well,
that's an interesting, I didn't even think of that, the toll it takes
Oh, let me tell
on
you,
your
actually,
health.
there's a speller who's in the speller movie, Elizabeth Bonker, who at the end of the movie does the valedictorian speech. One of the most brilliant individuals I've ever met. She's been doing studies at Rutgers, and I'm blanking on the clinical research scientist's name right now, but Elizabeth actually presented at a MedMaps conference. They were doing studies on the parasympathetic response and everything for individuals and for their loved ones. The cortisol
Yeah.
fight or flight response chronically like that. I mean, what it does to your body for those few isolated moments, you hear the stories of, petite women lifting a car off their baby, like
Right.
it's legit.
Yeah.
But when you have that adrenaline dump and cortisol dump chronically around the clock, not to mention, by the way, Joey didn't sleep for 20 years. So sleep deprived, cortisol dump. I absolutely think I had both hips and a knee replaced. Yes, I have rheumatoid, but if you
Uh,
think that the years of wrestling with a 200-pound man didn't have something to do with me
yeah.
losing my joints, I'm sure it did.
Was
I'm sure it
that
did.
what was the decision process to put him in a group home?
That kind of him and I and his dad split for reasons.
Yeah.
I have no ill will. I just didn't foresee how I can work full time, and I can't leave him home alone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I did. We lived together for a while until I got him in a place where he gets really good care.
Awesome.
So that worked out.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, interestingly enough, like now in this past year that I'm seeing that ultimately he will be able to spell and all of that. I mean, I'm still trying to get him in a group home closer to me so that I can
Yeah.
see him every day. It's a little over an hour, so I go on the weekend. But like if I try to leave after work during the week, it literally takes me 3 hours each way to get there. So because of traffic, good old New York.
Yeah.
Um,
It's like
but
California.
yeah, it is just like how, and in more ways than one.
Yeah. Yeah. What's your ultimate goal with him in the group home? Obviously, get him spelling.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I am trying. I've already applied stuff. I'm trying to get him closer to me. But the prospects with him learning how to spell and all, I hope that he won't need a group home
Mm-hmm.
in another year or two, and we can do what we need to do. I could have him in a day program and have him living at home with me. That would be amazing. That would be
Yeah.
amazing.
Well, we'll pray for that for sure.
Thank
And
you.
knowing you for the short time I've known you, I'm pretty sure you're gonna bang down any door that gets in your way.
Yeah, nothing's gonna stop me. I actually just through the people that I've met through Autism Health, it's so rewarding to me to have families, let us know that we're making a difference and that, there was one couple that came up on the stage and was saying they've been consulting with Tracy for a few weeks and the kids are already making like tremendous improvements, just in changing
Yeah,
some of the dietary changes. There's a lot of information out there and like it is so I just feel so fulfilled in like speaking to these families and having them start to work on healing their kid
yeah,
and it's that conference was life changing and this is exactly how I felt last year when I was in San Antonio. I was like, oh my
yeah.
god, and I hit the door running.
Well, it's
It's a journey
just
for all of us. And unfortunately, when you listen to mainstream, it's doom and I even, before you were asking me about like, when did that shift happen in my thinking? And, when I kind of like found God again and realized what I needed to do, I really, again, well intended people that care about me
hmm
would be, again, the best of intentions, feeling sorry for me and Joey. And yeah, listen, you could wish things were different. I do too, right? But inadvertently, there was this like hopelessness. Like it put me in victim mode. Like I,
mm,
again, very well intended, but it was like, yeah, poor me and Joey will never XYZ. Right. And like that was my destiny. And
hmm
like the shift came when I realized that I literally, when I first was talking to this family friend who happens to be a priest and I was going through all this, he looked at me and he's like, you've been through so much suffering,
hmm
But like when I viewed it as why God, it kept me stuck there as the
Mm,
victim. And it kept Joey stuck there as the victim. And when he looked at me and he's like, God wants you to use your suffering to serve and help others. And I was like, wow, light bulb. Like, I can heal my kid. I can get him spelling. And like, if I stayed in that poor us, look what pharma did to us, I never would have met you, right? Joey would still be, I'd still be asking him if he needs to go to the potty, right? I wouldn't know
yeah.
who he is, and that he really is in there and that he's bright and he's funny and he's all of these things. That's when I felt the calling. I'm like, oh, literally, he's like, no one could deny what you've been through,
Right.
and honestly, he looked at me, he goes, and I know you, I probably haven't heard half of it. I go, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, there's so
It
much
just
power in that.
really made me see that, like, that whole journey was so that I could meet Tracy and get on the board and impact these lives.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm doing. Like, I'm on a mission. And then PS, we came here after Sunday, after the thing, I came back to her house. There's a bunch of people that were at the conference. Was a doctor and a research scientist from Austria that's going to be doing this Autism One conference in Vienna. And they had announced Tracy and Steve and Andreas, our moderator for the conference, that they're going to be going to this huge conference, like literally global conference in Vienna. And I'm sitting here hanging out on her patio talking to Dr. Maria, and she's like, listen, I'm talking to the team. We'll pay for your travel expenses. You're going to Vienna. I don't care. Like, your story
Yeah.
needs to be told. And I'm like, literally,
Go.
I'm bawling. Like, are you serious? But to have a platform like that, like, I'm getting to these families. Like,
Yeah.
God, that is my purpose. Like, so many years, I'm like, why am I here? I wish I could do more. I mean, it's not a coincidence that I got into speech to deal with all these families that I have. It's not a coincidence. Like, at the time, I was like, why God? But this happened to Joey and to me so that we could go on this journey and grow to become the people that we are, so that we can impact these other families, no
Yeah,
doubt.
there's just so much power in going from a victim to a victor. And
Yep.
a verse comes to mind. I actually have it on my phone. In First Peter, and the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory, after you have suffered a little while, will himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast. I think you are a
Wow.
living, breathing example of that. I'd like to
Thank you.
close it out with one last question. What would you say to all the parents out there on a journey like yours?
Trust your gut. Don't take no for. By the way, I'm just trying to find. This is my Joey.
There he is.
Trust your gut. Whether, if unfortunately you've had that experience and your family has suffered loss, do not believe the mainstream that's out there giving you this hopeless victim
Mm,
scenario. There is so much help. And let me tell you, even since last year in San Antonio, I was completely blown away by everything from, the supplements and stuff to, some of the equipment and hyperbarics and all the things. But this year, some of the people we had, literally the doc was flown in from Malaysia with, I mean, I don't know, you and I was standing at the booth together trying to like, wait,
oh,
so which do we use for what? But
all
like,
right.
I mean, stem cells. I'm actually in the process of becoming an affiliate for some stem cells. There's a lot coming down the pike. There's a lot out there now. And a lot of it, even just the most basics, a lot of these nutritional dietary changes to help heal the gut issues is huge. So reach out. Certainly go to Autism Health. You can go right to our website.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot. The MedMaps, I just recently got back from a conference in Myrtle Beach. MedMaps is pediatric special needs. It's basically a lot of allopathic doctors who did whatever they were taught in med school for many years. And now all of a sudden are like, wait a minute. As they each saw their patient load, turn into what it became, they are doing all kinds of interventions and having tremendous success with reversing many of the symptoms. Again, you have to look at autism. Unfortunately, it's been purported as, this disability that like they're not making the connection that it's neural inflammation and it's autoimmunity that's the problem. And so they're treating symptoms.
Yeah.
Typical Western medicine, allopathic medicine is treating, I had my son on trazodone because he wasn't sleeping. Like, and each of those medications, by the way, that they put you on, causes horrible side effects. Joey's had one seizure in his life. It's because he was on a medication to help his platelet issue. All these docs are all different practitioners. There's chiropractors, there's nurse practitioners, there's, the people who want to keep an open mind and see these patterns that are happening to these kids as such and not treat symptoms, but really do the assessment to get to the root cause and treat the root cause.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot out there. And unfortunately, I spent many years listening to mainstream medicine. And even for myself, a lot of the things that I'm doing with Joey, it's because so his autism symptoms are mostly because of his neural inflammation. I have rheumatoid, my ankles were like this. And until I I also did not have the classic GI symptoms, like that. I didn't present like I had celiac or Crohn's or anything. But on my own, when I just started testing, cut out gluten, soy, dairy, whatever, all of a sudden my inflammation went down and so did my pain. Mm-hmm. So there is a method to the madness, but unless you get to the root cause, these docs who are chasing symptoms and treating symptoms with drugs that have horrible side effects. So great, I could treat my sleep problems, but then I go into renal failure. This is what's happening. So if you happen to have already had the injury, then I would say you need to reach out and do your research. And certainly, Tracy actually has a Substack, which is wonderful. She puts out I think almost daily, she's putting out new articles and things to kind of refer people to where we need to go, where the real sources are. My hope is that as RFK gets the word out there some more, then some of these treatments will become mainstream and hopefully ultimately insurances will start covering them as well. But, for those that are injured, definitely there's healing there. Don't get stuck in the poor me, seek it out. And whatever, like I said, I borrowed from my retirement to get to the summit, but know that Autism Health is really trying to do what we can to raise money so we can make those resources available. And if, God willing, you're a young couple starting a family, then please, heed the warning and don't do. And, so many people were like, oh, if you just delay them, if you pick and choose, one shot is too many. All of them have some of the side effects. The other thing I didn't talk too much about, we were talking more specifically about autism, but working in a public school, I walk into a classroom who's, that got 5 kids with ADHD, 3 nut allergies, all this autoimmunity. I had a kindergartner last year with Asperger's that got diagnosed with juvenile diabetes on top of it. I mean, the autoimmunity, the anaphylaxis, it's happening. It's not just like a random thing. This country, we are the most heavily vaccinated and we are the sickest. There's more, everything from the chronic diseases and the autoimmunities and the anaphylaxis to obesity. Yes, there are other environmental things and glyphosates and pesticides that we absolutely have to clear up as well. But the trigger is the vaccines, and it's led to a generation, of disease, and we need to get to the bottom of it. So as it becomes, which I think we're on the verge of, as it all really rolls out, hopefully some of the things that the FDA is not allowing as treatments will become more accessible. But the rise in autoimmunity and anaphylaxis, I mean, they don't tell you that, again, with my rheumatoid, my body is destroying my cartilage. It's making antibodies. Joey's antibodies are attacking his platelets. When people get an organ transplant, the first thing they do is you shut down your immune response because your body's going to reject that new liver or the new kidney, right? This rise in autoimmunity and anaphylaxis is happening because when they create these, in addition to the heavy metals and stuff that also destroys people's systems, they use aborted fetal tissue. They use bovine cells. They use monkey cells. They use porcine, the pig, and then they want to know why Joey thinks his platelets are fine. At 12 months, you give him an MMR, which has aborted fetal tissue. So he's getting DNA. They derive the DNA cell lines from an aborted fetus.
Wow.
So the autoimmunity, and by the way, yes, it's happening from the vaccines young, but maybe I'm crazy. But when I was growing up, I didn't know 30-year-olds with breast cancer and lupus and MS. Why is this happening to this generation? And again, I go right back to Dr. Hoover's, like literally the graph is like this. As the schedule went up, the incidence of autism. It's like completely parallel lines.
Wow.
Yeah. So the thing is, the studies that have been out for years, but haven't been out for years, RFK is going to get them out there. The testimonials, I mean, I've seen little like social media reels and stuff with Stanley Plotnick, like the godfather of vaccines, as he likes to be. And Aaron Siri is questioning him on the stand. And it's like unbelievable the way he talks about the aborted fetal tissue that's used in not just the MMR, like it's several vaccines. Even when Wakefield first came forward, Dr. Wakefield was a gastroenterologist in England, and he had some autism parents coming to him for their kids' GI concerns, but clearly stating that they were autistic. And he's like, listen, go see a neurologist. I don't know anything about autism. I'm a gastro guy, right? But all these parents were having all these GI issues with their kids. So he started scoping them and who had colitis and who had gut dysbiosis. And he openly acknowledged it's a small sample, but of those, this seems to be a common thread with these kids that they do all have these gut issues. So at the time, the MMR was being called into question. He was called into court and he said, listen, and he was very pro-vaccine. He said, I don't like what I'm seeing, but I acknowledge it. So he still was so pro-vaccine. He said, maybe the problem is in the combination of the MMR, the three of them together. So what he had suggested in a courtroom was, let's continue to study it. And in the meantime, just make it 3 separate shots. Give the kids the measles shot, the mumps shot, and the rubella as 3 separate, spread out over time so that they're still vaccinated, they're still protected. And from that moment on, basically, they pulled his license. And to this day, if you Google him, you hear the quack science doctor who caused the false MMR narrative. Nothing false about it. The man gave up his life and continues to make sure that the truth gets out there. These kids are injured. Now they're coming of age where they're adults. The younger generation, I did mention to you when we were talking, when I started in the public, I've been doing speech for 32 years, but I started in the public school in 2004 when Joey went into kindergarten. We had like a couple of autistic kids and, we started up a program. And then a few years later, we had 2 classes with autistic kids. And then a few years later, we had 3 classes and then 4. The younger generation, the cohort, that's why you see the numbers, right? They went down to now they're at 1 in 31. There's more and more of these kids that I know how hard it was to find a group home for Joey. And he was born in 99. He's like the start of this cohort, right? Even when we were in the hospital and he's, they had no idea how to deal with him, or like, you can't just treat him like a typical patient. He's got a lot of additional needs and you're confining him to a hospital bed and you're pounding him with sedatives to try, like, it was a nightmare, and he's the start. He's the lower numbers, right? Mm-hmm. Like, as we can, a decade from now, where are we putting all these individuals? And we're not putting them anywhere because we're going to heal them all.
That's right. The power of hope.
Yep.
And that was so encouraging leaving the conference. It's just the hope that was presented and brought. And I mean, hope is everything.
Yep.
And so here we are. There we have it, a powerful mom with a powerful story on a powerful mission. And this is exactly the purpose of this podcast and UNspecial, is just to have a space for parents like you to come share your story. So we are very thankful.
I really appreciate you having me. We need to get right out there.
Yeah.
We need to get these support to these families.
Yeah. Well, right on. Thank you again so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.